Hey everybody, it's Kathy. Welcome to episode 28 of Mondays on the Mat. I'm coming to you live from my office/yoga room. Got my co-host over here on my right, but as I said a few episodes ago, she's kind of gotten used to me sitting here talking at my phone, and she doesn't really make too many appearances anymore. But you never know, we might see her. She's kind of like, she's got an ear cocked out, so we'll see if she wants to come over and say hi. So today's topic is compassion, and is compassion even a yoga thing? And as we dive into today's topic, please remember, if you have questions or comments, please post them down here in the comment bar and I will definitely respond to you. And if you're watching this episode at a later time, after the live broadcast, you can still shoot some questions and comments my way, and I will make every effort to either respond to you there or answer you on an upcoming episode of Mondays on the Mat. So let's get into compassion and whether or not that's even a yoga thing or a yoga practice. So we've talked about in a couple of previous episodes, including last week, episode 27, a few weeks ago, episodes 12 and 13, the difference between Hatha yoga and Raja yoga. And you can always go back and watch those episodes later. Today's conversation is more in the Hatha yoga category, and it comes from the Hatha Yoga Pradipika versus the Yoga Sutras, which are Raja yoga. And this is why I prefer to teach a blend of the two concepts or understandings of yoga than specifically focusing on one, because both of them offer some really great juice. So in Raja Yoga from the Yoga Sutras, there are 5 yamas and 5 niyamas. The yamas being the way that we interact outwardly with the world, and the niyamas being the way that we interact inwardly with ourselves. But the Hatha Yoga Pradipika and Hatha Yoga has a larger number of both yamas and niyamas. Hatha Yoga has 15 yamas and 11 niyamas. And in Hatha Yoga, compassion is one of the yamas, a way that we interact outwardly with the world. And I really believe that before we can truly act that way towards other people with all of the yamas, we need to learn how to apply that towards ourselves. Now, as we get into yamas and niyamas, we're moving in towards more subtle energies in our body. In last week's episode, I showed a little drawing of moving outward into the bliss body, and the mind, the energy of the mind, is 3 layers in. So we start with our energetic body, then we go to prana or breath, and then we get into the mind. So as we get in today's topic, if it feels like too much, or you can't wrap your brain around it, or it's not something that you're capable of doing right now, that is so totally fine. Just think that this conversation today is like a seed being planted in your heart and your soul, and that it will in time start to germinate and grow from something that's not just a conceptual idea, but to something that you really feel and believe and can act on in your life. So let's start with the definition of compassion, as I think we all have an idea of what it is, but it's nice to be really specific and concrete. So compassion, I have it written down on a note so that I really nail it right on for you guys. Compassion is a feeling of sympathy and sorrow for another who is struck by misfortune, accompanied by a strong desire to alleviate the suffering. And I picked today, September 11th, as a day to talk about compassion and those who are struck by misfortune and our desire to alleviate that suffering, because it's easy when there are huge, monumental, life-altering tragedies happening, like the September 11th attacks, like all of the hurricanes and tornadoes and fires and earthquakes that are happening right now, that are dramatically affecting people's livelihood, their homes, their safety. And it's easy to have compassion, to have real sorrow and sympathy for people who are deeply affected by tragedy right now, and it's easy to find ways to alleviate their suffering in some way by making donations, volunteering time, sending prayers and good energy if you're living in a place where you can't be there to volunteer your time, opening your home. So that's easy and it's almost obvious in ways that we can compassionately help alleviate another person's suffering. But I feel like yoga and moving into these deeper layers of right living, which moves us deeper into a spirituality or a spiritual way of being in the world, it almost demands us to move beyond what is simple into things that are a little bit more challenging. And we'll talk in a minute about how your yoga practice on your mat, how your asana practice is the practice ground for having compassion towards yourself and others in life. But first, let's talk about situations where compassion may not be quite as simple or as obvious. Like, say you've got a coworker and you pass them in the hallway every day and they really don't even make eye contact, or they kind of scowl at you. They don't really engage with you. And it can be easy to think, ugh, what is her problem? Ugh, she's got to stick up her you-know-what, without ever considering that maybe internally that person is going through some real difficulties. Like maybe they're experiencing very high levels of depression and it's all they can do to get out of bed and be at work that day. Or maybe they are going through a really difficult breakup of a relationship. And again, it's like all they can do is show up for work, and what they're experiencing internally has nothing to do with you. But it's harder to have compassion when you don't know the internal suffering that's going on inside somebody. Or say, like you're at the grocery store and you really just want to grab whatever it is off the shelf, and there's a person who's standing there with their cart and they're blocking like everything you're trying to reach, and you're like, oh my god, why doesn't that person just move? But what if maybe that person on the inside is struggling so hard with feelings of not like unworthiness and shame, and they're like having this internal battle, like don't get the chips, don't get the chips, don't get the chips, and having this deep sense of remorse and almost a feeling of uncontrol as they reach out and grab the chips and put them in their basket. Like that is suffering. That is so much internal suffering. And to have compassion for that person when you're in a hurry and you just want to go check out is not so easy. And I could give numerous examples of, people in very high stress situations at work or at home, where they're not being their best self, where they're being really negative, where they're being disrespectful. And it's difficult to put yourself in their place and not only have sympathy for their suffering, but want to do something to alleviate it. So this is why our mat becomes our practice ground, because when we're on our mat, we can have times where we're having a great day, and we can have times where maybe we can't even balance in tree pose and we're falling all over the place, and we look around the room and everybody else is just like so steady and centered in their cute little yoga outfits with their tiny little booties, and on the inside we start to feel horrible. Like, oh my God, I totally suck at yoga. I don't deserve to be here. Everybody has better clothes. Everybody has cuter hair. I'm the only one who's falling down all over the place. And start to attack ourselves instead of having compassion. And so this is where your practice starts to teach you to have compassion for yourself. Maybe you didn't have a very good night's sleep last night. Maybe you haven't done laundry because you had something come up at work that kept you late, or one of your children needed care and you didn't have enough time or energy to even eat a decent meal that day, and that all shows up and affects your yoga practice, and therefore you don't have great balance, or you don't have a lot of stamina. Or a pose that you found really simple and doable last week, you can't even like halfway get into this week. And so compassion is really like understanding your own internal struggles and having great sympathy for your own personal struggles and wanting to alleviate your own struggles. And usually that in a yoga class is going to be through some mental refocusing on a mantra or closing your eyes and going into your breath and reminding yourself that yoga is so much more about how it feels on the inside than how it looks on the outside. So as you're struggling to balance that day and it seems that everyone else has pristine balance, you don't know what's going on inside their minds. Maybe that person in front of you is completely numbed out and can't feel anything. Or maybe that person in front of you is trying their very best to not start crying because their dog just died, or they had a huge argument with someone and they don't know if they'll ever speak to them again, and they're just trying to stand still and survive yoga class. And so compassion towards yourself isn't so much about getting caught up in the narrative of other people, but in connecting inward to your own experience and understanding that we are all human. It's so easy to think that everybody's life is perfect, and so you can use your own life experience, again, this sort of metaphor of your own struggles on your yoga mat, and realize you're not the only person who ever struggles in yoga. And so as you learn to be compassionate and speak to yourself internally the way you would speak to your best friend, and you start to really feel what that feels like, you can start to have compassion for the person who cut you off in traffic, or the person who was short with you and didn't offer any niceties that day. And to really start to have some sympathy for the fact that we are all human. And none of us is perfect, and we all have this internal narrative that's flowing through us all the time. And so your own experience of that can help you to have compassion for others. And now sometimes you can't alleviate another person's suffering. You can offer to help or be there or witness their struggles, and they might refuse you, and that's okay. That's just a part of that whole human experience. And what you have to know is that you offered and you reached out. And then whether someone else takes your offering of wanting to help alleviate their suffering or not is beyond your control. But you always have within you a way to want to alleviate someone else's suffering, even if it's simply by, in your prayer and meditation time, that you send them some good energy, or you send them a nice note or text or a message or a phone call. So compassion is a yoga practice. It's something you can cultivate while you're right there on your mat towards yourself. And as that begins to make sense, you can cultivate it towards average, ordinary, everyday people in average, ordinary, everyday life, because those situations are far more common than the big events that a lot of us are experiencing right now in the world. Like these big, huge difficulties tend to come along less frequently. And they are good practice grounds too, right? Because they teach us to remember that everyone really at the end of the day is a human being, and each human being is a tentacle of what I call the cosmic jellyfish. So we're all an extension of the divine bursting forth through us as us, and none of us can ever be separate from that energy. And so therefore, that's the meaning that we look for in each other's lives, and that's what we're looking to when we're compassionately helping another human being, is that really we're all connected on a much higher level. And so again, if some of this stuff doesn't make sense, because for a lot of years, guys, it didn't make sense to me either, just keep showing up and getting on your mat and doing your yoga practice and working from those outer layers in. And that's one of the coolest things about yoga, is that by working with your physical body, you start to affect changes in your breath, you start to affect changes in your mind, and you start to move closer and closer to that understanding of universal truth and of connecting in with the bliss body. So Thank you so much for listening today to some ramblings on compassion. Yes, they are a yoga practice. No, it doesn't have to all make sense right now. And just trust and know that the more you show up and do a yoga class just with your physical body, it's not ever just with your physical body. You're making deeper changes than you might even be aware of at the time. So keep showing up this week. In my group classes, we'll still be focusing on posture with some front shoulder and chest opening, upper back, shoulder blade area strengthening, little bit of mild core strengthening, and a whole lot of other yummy energetic stuff to help us stay grounded as the season sort of fluctuates back and forth between Pitta and Vata. It's going to be a great week, everybody. I'm so grateful that you tuned in and listened to me talk about compassion. Remember, if you have questions about yoga that you'd like answered on an upcoming episode, you can shoot them to me here. You can ask them over there on YouTube. You can ask me live in class. However it works, I'm always excited and I love talking to you and helping you learn and grow more in your own yoga experience. So come see me this week in group classes, Tuesday 6:30 to 8, Wednesday 5:30 to 7, Friday 9:30 to 11, and Saturday 9 to 10:30. Have a beautiful rest of your Monday, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Namaste.